Stuart, welcome to Pathway Spotlight. Always good to see you. This is a section where I myself talk to senior management team and members of the board. We call it Pathway Spotlight. We did some videos last year, and this is the 2017 new series. So thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
So you joined the team, the Pathway Group board, I think last September. Correct me if I'm wrong. But we've been working together for a little longer than that. If you can just do a little bit of introduction in terms of who you are, and a little bit of background, and again, how your experience has been. What's and all.
Yeah. Well, yes, I originally joined Pathway just supporting the business development, bid writing, supporting the development of new bids. Yeah. Obviously, the world of training is changed quite radically over the last sort of 18 months. And so I've been working along with the team to actually develop more proactive and more productive bids, partnership bids, and really looking at how that can be pushed on and developed. Yeah. And then, as you say, in September...
It was September.
Yeah, 20th September.
Okay.
In September, I joined the board as a non-exec, looking at the governance arrangements. Yeah. And really, I suppose, my job was to kind of come in, take an outside perspective, kick over the rocks, and see what crawled out, good and bad, looking for good and bad practice, what could be done, what needed to be addressed because it was a weakness, what could be done better, and generally identify, those elements that are working well within the organisation. Yeah. So, and then it was a trial by fire because within
a couple of weeks, wasn't it?
A week and a half, I think it was. Yeah, it was. We then went into the Ofsted inspection, which was. It was a good opportunity to see how the team worked together. Yeah. It enabled me just to, observe the interactions, observe how they came together under a stressful situation, to actually deliver a really good result. And that kind of demonstrated to me the absolute potential within the team. And I think that was good. And not forgetting the fact that we turned in a really good result. It, with a grade 2 in the Ofsted is a result to be proud of, and the team rightly should be very proud. And I think that's given us a good starting point, because where you are is 2, it's good. There are elements that could be better, and I guess that's why I'm here. That's what my job is, to support you and support the guys move towards that, move in that role, move towards better. And I think it's going to be an interesting role. I'm quite looking forward to how that kind of goes forward.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of Ofsted, Ofsted have a big focus on governance, and they were talking about governance. And again, in our report, there's a sort of a very large, lengthy paragraph on governance.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's your take on governance in terms of what impact can that have on an organisation? I
think governance is really important because governance, as it stands, when you own a business, as you're aware, you get. Your job as the owner, the CEO, is to kind of be forward-looking, looking at the horizon and see what's coming next, and actually focus on where you're going. And when you're doing that, you're not looking at how your business is operating on a practical level. Yeah. I think governance is good because it reminds you that you need to be aware of kind of what's going on within it as well. Yeah. And conversely, there are, as CEO, very often you'll get pulled into the day-to-day of the operation, and you'll stop with the horizon scanning. And again, the converse situation arises where, good governance, lifts your eyes back up. So it takes you out of the business, takes you up into a helicopter view to look down on your business and actually evaluate your business with a real perspective. Because, as I say, as an owner, you get passionate. You get so caught up in the operation that you generally don't then understand either the longer term view or what's going on beneath you, and it's a balancing act. So what governance does is give you somebody that is independent of the organisation, somebody who is not vested in any particular aspect of the business, and what they can do is they can reflect where the business is at, and actually bring to your attention, ask the difficult questions that perhaps you don't necessarily want to ask yourself. And though it's only by those questions, that questioning, that you then understand what's good, what's bad, what could be improved, and really what options you have for moving the business forward.
Yeah. If you look at the further education sector, the colleges, the sort of charities, voluntary sector, they've always been, moving. They've always had a high regard for governance, and it's a key part of their business. But particularly in terms of independent training providers, where it's sort of CEO led, with shareholders, managing directors of the tend to be mostly the same people. It's not been something that's been high on the agenda. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problem you have with exactly that situation, is that a CEO works within a bubble. Yeah. The team work within a bubble, and if you don't have trustees, independent third parties that come in on a governance basis with your organisation, you don't get a view of the external world. And what is really apparent is training providers who don't have that external input, very often they could, in their own minds, they could be very good, but they're blinkered. They don't see the bigger picture, and more importantly, they don't see how changes occur. So, I've worked with a number of organisations where the owner and the team have been with the organisation forever and a day, from day one. Yeah. And the consequence of that is they do what they do because they've always done it. The problem is, in training, it's a dynamic industry. It's constantly in change. I mean, as you know, currently we're looking at frameworks, going to standards. Yeah. We've got funding. We've got funding reform for across all of apprenticeships. They're looking at a classroom to boardroom level of support for business, and that it means that the way we work is completely going to have to do a 180 or a complete mind shift. With external governors, you get that input from lots of ears that are talking to lots of organisations, and they bring that benefit to the organisation. Whereas if you're insular, if it's only you in a team, it's a nice bubble, everybody's been there forever, you don't actually get that. You don't get that new information coming in. Yeah. So you stand or fall by what you know, and very often you need to be a lot more agile as an organisation.
I've heard you many times talk about evoking change, and it doesn't happen. And there's something has to move that. Just going back to sort of the governance aspect of it. If somebody was to sort of set up a board, what's your advice in terms of having that, and how do you go about selecting, particularly if you're an independent training provider, Ofsted. Yes, fine, we'll talk about the changes that are happening, but Ofsted are talking, fairly regularly, and if you see the reports, governance is the key part of the agenda at the moment.
I think the important thing is to look at your stakeholder groups as a business, and really what you're looking for with your governance team is representation that's as wide as it possibly can be. So, for example, if you can get representation from a member of staff who's at each level within the organisation, possibly across departments, what you do is you get a view of how life is for the staff. If you have learners on your governance team, so you have a learner on your governance team, then you're getting participation, you're getting a little bit of checks and balances around the learning experience. Yeah. Conversely, same with the employers. If you've got some key employers you work with, their participation, and then you've got your funding side of things. So, having a governor who is well versed with the skills funding agency or an education skills funding agency, or with a college as a prime, having that kind of representation is good, because what you're doing is it's the perspectives they bring. So when you look at the world, you look at the world through a perspective of training provider and a leader in a training provider. A learner looks at the world from the perspective of somebody who is striving and struggling to learn something to better themselves. Employers are all about, in a competitive world, looking for competitive advantage, profit maximisation. But they look at the same. You might be looking at the same issue, but because you're looking at it, coming at it from different angles, what you tend to see is you see a broader picture. So your governance team made up of stakeholders more more widely, does give you that real depth to the way things are viewed within the organisation. And by taking on board those views, what you do actually get is what you get coming out of it is a more structured organisation, a more effective, dynamic organisation. It's more agile because it's responsive to the changes, and I think that is key, and that is a critical thing, and that's why governance is so important.
We touched on the change and the fact that obviously the whole sector has changed in the last 18 months, and there's a lot of change that's still to take place. What is the current sort of situation at this moment in time from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, I mean the changes are quite huge across all aspects of the funding arena. So, for example, we're in limbo with work programme. We had work programme, which was a DWP programme for putting unemployed people back into work. That came to a close. That's been on a wind down contract for nearly 2 years now. And the work and health programme, which is going to be its successor programme, is still in the process of going through and starting to take effect. So there's been a big gap for providers to survive in that process. We've recently had Brexit, but we have a lot of funding that is European Social Fund money, which is skill support for unemployed and skill support for the workforce. That funding is here today, and it will be here over the next year or so while we're going through the Brexit processes. Yeah. But we've got to look at what's going to be the longer term impact. So taking that horizon scanning view I kind of alluded to, though that funding streams are either going to have to be replaced by UK money, or we're going to see a fundamental change to the way things are working. More locally, we've got things like apprenticeship reform, and there's a move towards employer ownership of training and education. So the reforms are all about two things really. One, making education more appropriate for an employer, so employers get something that they actually value rather than something that's done to them. It's something that's done with them. The standards are more flexible, and the standards are going to be designed in such a way that they go from a level 2 to a level 6. So you've got really from a classroom level, somebody new joining in as a young person potentially joining the organisation, right the way through to board level support, which is a really exciting way. And it come out of the Richards report that was that they were looking at this continuity, which is where the UK was lacking by comparison to our peers across Europe and globally. So that's I mean, on an individual funding level, we've got adult education budget, which was caught up in PERDA. So there was a big tendering round for that. That's been caught up in PERDA. So we're hopefully by the end of June, we will actually pick up a result on whether that's actually going to move ahead. And it appears from the conferences, the mandatory training that's been going on around the country from the Education and Skills Funding Agency, that advanced learning loans, there is not going to be a tendering round for the foreseeable future. Now, that is said today, but it can potentially change. But advanced learning loans are a good innovation in their own right. So an advanced learning loan, when you go to university, you can actually have a student loan to pay for your tuition fees and your living while you go through the processes of education. Advanced learning loans are the same thing, but for people that want to take on non-higher education learning. So it's the same facility, the borrowing facility, lending facility, but it's enabling people who don't want to go to university to learn to actually procure their learning.
The career progression and so forth is fantastic.
Oh, absolutely.
Training and all of that.
But I think the big thing with all of these changes is that it's all about value and value creation. So I think where it was before, it was a one-size-fits-all, and you had an MVQ or a apprenticeship in whatever discipline that you took it in, and it came out as a solid, this is what you're buying, whether you want it or not. And you might be lucky, an employer might be lucky if 50% was relevant to them, or a learner might be lucky if there was 50% that's relevant to them, and then the other 50%, they do it because they have to in order to achieve the award. The way it's going now is it's very much more focused on what is the individual career pathway going to demand now? And that is what's built into it. And that's the flexibilities that I was talking about. And I think because of that, employers have got to invest. We've got things like employer contribution. Yeah. That's a big thing. So an employer has to value the apprenticeship. And by valuing the apprenticeship, that means they've got to put their hand in their pocket and pay for it, whereas historically, it was something they could have free. And value creation is very simple. If somebody gives you something, you do not value it. You might appreciate it, but you don't value it. If you have to buy something, you want value for money. Yeah. You want something that's quality. Yeah. And in reality, that's where the employers are now. So, you know, the offer that providers are having to put together has to have real tangible benefit for employers and for learners for them to go ahead. I mean, advanced learning loans, if a learner is going to commit themselves to a £5,000 debt for a qualification, they really want to see something tangible out of that £5,000. They don't want to walk away having not even felt that they've been on a learning programme, you know, apart from just receiving a certificate. They want to have something that has made them better, given them knowledge, given them skills, that's enabling them to progress in life. Yeah. And, you know, it's like, that's a big investment, you know, in that, either on a personal basis from advanced learning loan or for a company through an apprenticeship programme. Okay,
fantastic. Stuart, you've touched on it, but who do you think are the winners and the losers with all this change that's taking place?
I think the learners are going to be the real winners. And they're going to be the real winners because I think that employers and training providers are both going to have to up their game. That said, I think training providers who deliver training properly, you know, and deliver a quality service that really, you know, enables the learners to have an impact will actually win with employers, and they'll develop opportunity. So, for example, training providers now are not capped by a funding formula. They're capped by how well they engage with employers. So if an employer wants you to do the work, then you can do the work. You're not capped all of a sudden because you've got some formula that says your turnover is this, therefore you can only do this much work. Yeah. The other winner, although they potentially don't appreciate it yet, will be employers. And employers will benefit because they will have a better quality workforce because they will have skill sets more closely matching to their gap, provided that they actually engage properly with the process. So, for example, apprenticeships, if they design the apprenticeship, the content of the apprenticeship, the learning, the structure, and it's a proactive two-way process or three-way process, including the learner, the provider, and the employer, then what you will actually develop coming forward from that is that there will be some real impact measures they can set. So if they have, you know, a young person come into the organisation, what is it they are going to achieve in their apprenticeship? Set them targets, set them milestones, give them projects that coincide with their learning, and actually those projects themselves should have impact, you know. And if they're proper projects, not mate work projects that have business advantage, then that will be fundamentally a good way to actually get a success for the employer, and there'd be a real win there for them as well.
Okay. Stuart, in terms of obviously the localization changes that have taken place, I mean, there's a lot of talks about LEPs and the impact of LEPs and effectively devolution as well, and you know, the money's going to sort of moving away from centrally to different sort of ways of procuring. You know, what's your thoughts in terms of, you know, from a procurement perspective and, you know, bid writing and looking for opportunities in terms of actually, you know, looking at where the direction that's going. What's your thoughts in terms of changes there?
In reality, the changes make it a lot harder for a provider. I mean, you know, you're right. Localization is great because what you get from localization is you get the people at the coalface deciding what's needed at the coalface. So you've no longer got Westminster saying that in the Midlands they need this, or in Newcastle they need that. What you've got is you've got the people in those areas going, this is what we need. These are our priorities, which is why you get the strategic economic plans for those locations, and then they then set out their budgets for their training and their priorities for their training. So what you get more closely matches to what the local need is. So that's the benefit of localization. In practice, however, from a bid writing perspective, what this means is that tendering, for example, now becomes localized too. So you no longer bid for a national contract. So it's one tender for a national contract and then you use it wherever you need it. You are now bidding into local councils, so you're doing multiple bids. You're providing services on a local level. The chances of economies of scale gets more complicated. You start to take a project-based approach, and there's two kind of business models you can use. You can either use a management, operations management approach to delivering your services, which you would do with national initiatives like apprenticeships and advanced learning loans, or you can take a project-based approach, which is where they're using a discrete and distinct project. So a local council that's running an 18-month ESF programme, that will be a distinct project, but it will need its own infrastructure, its own management. I mean, and to give you some context, the NHS have just recently done in response to the apprenticeship programme, the NHS have gone, as a levy employer, have created an approved supplier list. So you've got everybody that's on ROTAP, the Register of Apprenticeship Training Providers. They've invited all those to actually bid to become an approved supplier to the NHS in a pre-qualification process. What that's done is that means a number of organisations have actually put in an application and they now get invited to a mini competition. So as each individual NHS trust hospital decides that they want to run their apprenticeships for the year, they're putting mini competitions together that people have to bid into. Now, the difficulty with that is each one of those projects is run in isolation, and they're doing it for, and from as little as 5 apprentices right up to 100 apprentices for that particular hospital. The problem that you've got is there are 16 narrative questions, each of which is 500 words. You've got a financial profile to put together, and at the end of the day, that might be for 10 apprentices. Now, if you win, you might go, well, that's okay. But in reality, you've got, I suspect in the first round that went in just recently, I suspect just looking at the clarification questions that were going in, there and the volume of questions, there has got to be a significant, this was a London opportunity, and there was a significant number of questions which were coming from different organisations. So while we don't have an exact count of how many applications they've received, I am suspecting that one organisation is going to win, and I'll bet there is probably a 3-figure number that's actually applied for that work. And in reality, so the chances of somebody who says to you, what's the chances of a win? It's 1%, assuming everybody's bid is equally good. So it's tough, but somebody's going to win that work. I think it's going to be a bit of a lottery until it settles down. Now, when you consider that, then you've got to do 10 bids to get a win. Then in reality, you can see how 16 questions, 500 words, it scales up, and the return on it is very small. Bid writing is a skill, and the one thing about small organisations, one thing about even medium-sized and even large organisations, to be fair, is that everybody's busy. So to take 5 days to write a tender, it's 5 days if you're not doing anything else. As a bid writer, I will turn my phone off. I focus on what I'm doing, and then I might check on my emails at lunchtime or in the evening. As a bid writer, I can do that. As an owner of a business, there is no way you can be out of contact for that length of time. So practically wise, bid writing is, A, it's a skill, and B, even if you've got the skill, you've still got to have the time to do it justice. And so, it's a very big thing. It's a big cost.
How do different organisations sort of look at procurement and bid writing? I mean, obviously, with the Birmingham colleges recently, with the further education sort of news, a lot of them didn't get onto the sort of the ROTAP aspect of it, possibly because the task was given to maybe a junior member of the team. So, what's your thoughts in terms of how is that seen, such as these important sort of, they're becoming more and more important in terms of...
Well, I think what's become apparent just recently is, and ROTAP is a good example of this, is the amount of large organisations, training providers and colleges who should be on ROTAP, who had egg on their face because actually they didn't make the list. And they didn't make the list on the basis of technicalities, on the basis of incorrect answers, and fundamentally that is a major problem. So even large organisations with bid writing teams probably didn't take it as seriously.
PR disaster, but it's a business disaster potentially.
Absolutely. I mean, and a lot of them were just fortunate that the ESFA actually ran a second round.
Yeah.
And I am suspecting that that second round was actually only run because of the names that were missing from the submissions first time round. And I think that's key. I mean, conversely, it is a great opportunity for new businesses to actually get on the playing field, because without being the ROTA, Register of Training Organisations, and the Register of Apprenticeship Training Providers, and even the Register of Apprentice Assessment Organisations, they are closed shops. Between tendering rounds, they are closed shops. So it does enable, when these rounds do open, they open for a brief window, and they are an opportunity for a new provider to actually get on the playing field so that they can work. Because as you know, a provider that's not on the Register of Training Organisations can only do up to £100,000 worth of government funded business across all their contracts. And in reality, you've got to have that. Once you're on the register, then obviously you can start working with that. So it opens up avenues. So when they do open, it's a massively important thing to get it right, because you can't guarantee there will be a second opportunity to actually do this. And I think that's the thing. And you can't take a tender for granted. It is the art of tendering, particularly in the education sector, is getting absolutely critical. And it's a big area of development.
A lot of risks as well. A lot of things can go wrong as well.
Yeah.
But at the same time, a lot of opportunities if you get it right.
Yeah. I mean, what a lot of people don't understand is when you write a tender, the tender you write, the promises you make, the things, the off-the-cuff comments you say in your tender to try and win the business, you are contractually bound to those. So when they give you your contract, it's not just a contract, which is the standard document they send out as part of the tendering process. It is actually also underneath that is everything you say
to the actual
is there. So if you say you have a certain quality grade, if you have this level of education in your staff, whatever it might be, then that is what you are committing yourself to. And as a result of that, I think very often a lot of people don't appreciate that is a fundamental part of their contract.
Yeah, Stuart, you talked about opportunities for employers. There's an employer provision as well in terms of employers looking at maybe setting up as a training provider and looking at drawing down funding, particularly for the apprenticeship. What's your thoughts in terms of somebody embarking on that journey?
Well, again, the good news is that there is a range of mechanisms or methods by which you can now, as an employer, solve your training problems. So it can be that you buy it from a training provider. It can be that you set up your own internal academy, and some large employers, do actually already have academies that they have. And so for larger organisations where you've got lots of people taking very similar qualifications, then absolutely, I think being an employer, being your own deliverer is a good thing. Yeah. I think in reality, that most employers will take a blended approach. Even large employers will take a blended approach, because you might have Jaguar Land Rover who will do engineering apprenticeships, and they'll do those delivering through their own staff. But equally, they will still want sales, they'll still want HR, they'll still want accountancy, but they won't want a lot of it that warrants setting up a specialist academy for those things. So those qualifications, what they would potentially do is still go out to a provider network to actually supply those particular things. So it's working with employers, and I think employers who do take advantage of it, if they've got the delivery infrastructure, it can be a very good thing. But I think sometimes it can be seen as a way of making money by an employer. It can be a revenue generation stream in their minds, but unless you have a certain critical mass, then it either gets done badly or it costs a lot more than people anticipate when they when they budget it up in the first instance. So again, advice to an employer is, before you take that step, don't eliminate it as a possibility, but properly cost it out, because there is a lot of stuff that as an employer you take for granted, and particularly employers that don't work in the public sector. If you're a commercial business, then you are used to a certain mindset, which is always about profit maximisation, driving efficiency, making the organisations run sensibly and smart without any overlap or silliness in the process. Yeah. Conversely, the public sector, the funding rules, and a bit like I alluded to earlier, when you set a minimum like the NHS, they want a full up submission for 10 apprentices. That's not cost effective neither for the provider who's got to sit there and write it. But if you think about being the NHS now, they've got to have 2 people evaluate those applications. So if it takes me 5 days to write it, it will take each one of those people a day to evaluate it. Then they'll have to feed it back. That's not including the fact it probably took them a couple of days to set the specification for what they wanted in the first place. So in reality, the cost of their days probably far outweighs the cost of what they've actually bought. Right. So from a management perspective, it's not balanced. Commercially, you don't have those kind of situations going on. You tend to be much slicker, much smoother, but you are interacting with the public sector and public sector funding, and there are a lot of hoops to jump through. And it doesn't matter how big you are as an organisation, you'll be expected to have whistleblowing policies, safeguarding events, designated safeguarding officers, equality and diversity, and all those people require mandatory training, CPD logs, DBS. I mean, the setting up there's a lot of stuff behind it. And then you've got to have Matrix, which is an accreditation for provision of IAG, information, advice and guidance. I mean, as you start to drop into it, there is more and more and more that emerges. And I think employers sometimes need to understand that going in, because that actually helps inform the decision on what is the best mechanism. Is it better to do that internally, or is it better to bring on a partner organisation, maybe a prime training provider, who will then manage the network of sub-bodies? So it could be that actually, rather than actually the employer, so one model is the employer manages it themselves directly and delivers chunks of it through their own staff. Another model could be that they actually engage with a training provider who manages it on their behalf, and actually becomes almost like a managing agent for the actual training. And maybe that will deliver some training, but also they would also control, because again, they're industry experts. They know what the industry is about. They know what due diligence is required, for all those providers that they use. So they know what insurances are supposed to have. They know what they need to do to meet the requirements of Ofsted. And all those bits that go run along with it. So that could potentially be a model. And then you have your independents, and there will be neutral vendors, which could be another avenue for an employer to take. So there's good choice, but it's not a decision you take lightly. I think really, employers need to actually go, you need to look at, I guess, employers at the moment, they look at an apprenticeship programme and they look at it really as a CSR, a corporate social responsibility. I'm doing my bit for the community because I'm going to employ an apprentice or a couple of apprentices. What they're not really doing is they're not looking at it going, these apprentices are providing a competitive advantage for my organisation.
Talent management aspect.
And I think really there's got to be a bit of a mind shift and change of mindset there. And then there's got to be, once that mindset's changed, then you've got to be saying, well, okay, how do I maximise that impact and benefit of this talent? And actually, what's the best mechanism for me? And actually cost it up. Look at what your apprentices are going to bring to you, look at what you're going to develop through the organisation, and actually then look at which model best fits your organisation. And I say different organisations will have, there isn't a single prescription. And unfortunately, it's going to take work to arrive at, the options, and then some time to make, to evaluate those options and actually decide on what is the best course of action. And there is a lack of knowledge out there as well, unfortunately. That is clear. And unfortunately, you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of employers are looking at some of these opportunities and they don't really appreciate it. And it's only when they start to get into it, what on face value looks like a good idea, when they start dropping into it, more and more starts to come through and emerge, and I think that's kind of key. So
that statement always reminds me of Donald Rumsfeld for some reason, and I just can't get that thought out of my mind. So thanks for that, Stuart. I want to talk, if I may, a little bit about partnership working. As we've discussed many times before. I mean, in terms of tendering and bids, I mean, partnership has been the way for the last few years anyway. But it's more and more in terms of training providers working with others, looking at each other as sort of collaborative partners rather than competitors. You talked about supply chain and vendor management and so forth. What's your thoughts in terms of as an independent training provider, how do you go about building partnerships, and should you embrace it? Just your thoughts on that.
This is a good question, because this one again is a double-edged sword. On the partnership in principle is a great idea, and it's quite easy to see that if you want to work with a local council want to have a contract to work with a youth enterprise or youth initiative program, or a young people's program, for example, and the contract will be worth £1 million or £2 million. Small training providers individually do not have the physical size or financial resource to bid for that money themselves. So they have two mechanisms. They can either work as a subcontractor to a larger prime who will own the contract and divvy it out, which requires partnership in a positive way, like you kind of said. Or you can set up a consortium, which is a special purpose vehicle, which is where there isn't really a main prime. It's actually an accumulation of partners who collectively have enough size to manage the programme. And that's the positive side of partnership. You can share best practice, you can outsource, relationships are good. So partnership collaboration is very useful for that. If you're down on, finances are very tight, profiles are very tight. In funding terms, we have very discrete envelopes of funding that have to be managed. And if you've got a network of partners around you, then you can manage it more effectively, because you've got to stay within certain tolerances. Conversely, the downside is that funding is a little bit fickle. And what I mean by that is, advanced learning loans, it used to be you could subcontract advanced learning loans, but now you can't subcontract that provision. So if you're a small provider that's working in partnership with a prime, they just turn around to you and say, sorry, as much as we want to continue working with us, we can't. So that partnership relationship has become damaged, really. And again, apprenticeships, the apprenticeships didn't roll forward as they were supposed to on the 1st of May, with all the new people that went onto the register of apprenticeship training providers, all then starting on contracts and working with small and medium-sized enterprises. So the government has arranged for transitional contracts. And those transitional contracts are for a 7-month period, I guess, where they've gone to their existing employer, their existing training providers, and then actually said, we'll give you a contract for this period to act as a bridge. What they've done is they've only issued, generally, and this is national picture, they've generally only allocated about 10% of previous spend to each of the providers. So the consequence is that primes who have nurtured networks and developed networks and supported them, helping them with policies, processes, infrastructures, e-portfolio systems, and actually helped build the quality of the wider network, are now in a position where they probably don't have enough funding to deliver their own apprenticeships, let alone actually then pass some of that funding on to their partners. So from a partnership perspective, that relationship is damaged, because again, when you look at it from both sides, you've got the prime who want to do their best but pragmatically have to look after their business first, and you've got the subcontractors who want who want to have a good solid relationship with their primes, who all of a sudden are being cast away and actually are scrabbling around for other primes to try. And the downside of that is that you end up with a small provider with limited management resource that then hooks into 6 or 7 different primes to get a little bit of money from here and a little bit of money from there and a little bit of money from there. And each one of those has a different system. So each one of those primes then want you to fill in a SAR template that matches their SAR template. They want you to fill in a report on a monthly basis, and it's a different report, and it's a different report structure. They want to, each one of those primes wants to have a monthly management meeting, contract review meeting, and all of a sudden you've got 6 primes. So where the prime is using 1 day, you're using 6 days or however many contracts you've got. So the loading on management actually becomes very severe for smaller organisations, and so partnership is good, but too much partnership can be destructive because it takes the organisation out of the balance between management and delivery, and you want to keep that in balance. So you end up top heavy, too many chiefs, not enough Indians, and it needs to have that kind of process. It needs to pull it together, and that's tough. So there is no right way again to deal with that. Interestingly, the industry does appear to be helping itself a lot more. You've got a lot more, user groups on LinkedIn. There's a lot more collaboration. Peer meetup is a great idea where the training provider network actually works for itself. Yeah. They decide who they want to hear from, speaker-wise. They actually network with each other. It's a good networking event. And they're actually also sharing best practice about the industry and also what's going on. So they're making everybody aware and putting everybody on the same page. Breaking down these barriers, and I talked about earlier that there's isolation. Yeah. And they are breaking down this isolationist view by sharing information that perhaps the organisation wouldn't have if they just soldiered on as an individual business. So it's things like that are enabling partnership to work and build and develop and hopefully organisations to survive.
I mean, your background is recruitment, or you've been involved in the recruitment sector before. I mean, is there some aspects of the training sector going towards those sort of recruitment models? You talked about vendor management, supply chain. The whole recruitment sector is all about. Some of it's about partnership working, second tiering, and all the rest of it. Do you think that there's a transition towards that type of?
Yeah, I mean, I think that transition happened a while ago when the Skills Funding Agency decided that and before then the DWP, they decided, in their cost cutting, we've had this period of rationalisation of public sector. So it used to be that DWP would have 30 contracts with 30 different providers in an area. And all of a sudden what they did was they said, well, actually, we're having to manage 30 contracts. What we're going to do is we're going to have one contract, and then all the other 29 can work for that one contract holder. And therefore it eliminated large elements of their costings for managing processes. The SFA did the same. It used to be that there was under the Learning Skills Council, there was 47 offices. When there were techs, there were 74. So we went from 74 back in time. When we had training and enterprise councils, we had 74 local offices for them. They then became the Learning and Skills Council, and there was 47 regional offices for them. And then we've gone to the SFA, and they have pretty much cleared out. And I think they had ended up with about 6 or 7, regional offices. That literally, so you've had this reduction, and obviously a reduction in headcount, and that has caused this whole movement towards prime arrangements, and that does map to like you say, recruitment, which is a vendor.
Is that taking place with employers? That's funding in terms of from a funding perspective. But if employers now are responsible for their apprenticeship levy funding and so forth, I mean, how are they? Are they going to be sort of looking at those sort of models of operation? Do you feel?
It's highly possible. I mean, again, it depends on the size of the employer. I mean, if you've got an employer with a £3 million payroll, so they are a levy employer, that they can have a £3 million payroll with 120 staff. Yeah. By definition, it's still a small and medium-sized enterprise. So with 120 staff. Conversely, you can have 70,000 staff. So again, it's different. Each one will employ a different model. It will be the ones that don't have, well-formed HR or systems, processes and departments within their businesses. They're the ones that will potentially will outsource it. Like they might outsource their payroll, they might outsource their HR, they might outsource it as a vendor management for the training. Yeah. And maybe they'll outsource it without even really appreciating the advantage they could have developed from it by spending a bit of time thinking on it. Because the problem is when you outsource something, you almost divest yourself of understanding something, and it becomes done to them again, not done with them. And I think that is a thing. So it probably isn't the best model, unless you have an inclusive model where there is good, solid communication. But yes, I think there will be a number of employers who will look to make life easy, because the other thing you've got to think about is most employers, they might be in a particular sector. So you might be a construction employer,
Yes.
but you don't just do construction. Yes, you'll have all your trade skills, but you'll have administrators, salespeople, back office, accountancy, you name it. There will be a whole raft of peripheral jobs within the business. And what that means is it's unlikely that they'll be able to get one provider who can give them everything as a one-stop shop. Now, what that will mean is they've got to have multiple relationships, and because of those multiple relationships, do they want to manage each one of those relationships individually, or do they want to do like they do in recruitment, go to a vendor management company and get them to actually do all of the due diligence, get them to do all of the hassle, and they just basically tell the vendor management company, we want 5 admin apprentices, we want 20 bricklayers, we want 3 salespeople, we want 1 HR, and we want 1 accountant. And then that organisation then facilitates the delivery of that learning with a whole network. And that's really the question. And that is the model in recruitment. That happens a lot in recruitment. But again, it doesn't apply to all. It doesn't apply to all companies. Not all companies in recruitment use a vendor management process.
I'm sure we're sort of mid-year at the moment, 2017. You talked about obviously the changes taking place. We've got this period now where previously it was quite fairly simple. We had 2 sort of periods. Academic year split into 2 periods. We've got this transition to December. We've got the advanced learning loans. Between now and the rest of the year, December, what are the ups and downs in terms of the opportunities? We talked about adult education, but just summarise that in terms of where are we? What's the next sort of 6-7 months?
Okay, probably number one on that on the horizon is levy employers. Levy employers are here and now. Yeah. If an employer wants you to deliver their training, then you can deliver. They can engage you, and provided they're registered with HMRC, they can engage you. You can do delivery, and it's uncapped. That is got to be perhaps the biggest thing. Moving forward, we've got the new work and health programme. That should be coming out hopefully this side of Christmas. AEB, as I've already said, that was held up because of PERDA. We should have that come the end of June, maybe early July on a time scale. So those are kind of your big 3. Advanced learning loans will continue pretty much in the vein that they are in, which is good for providers who already have an advanced learning loan contracts, not so good for providers that don't have them but want to break into that marketplace. And I think the one thing that we all need to keep an eye on is the impact of Brexit on training, because what a lot of people don't know, people are very often aware that European ESF programs, European Social Fund programs, are funded by Europe. And as a result, they put 2 and 2 together. We've got Brexit, we've got ESF. There's going to be an issue. What people haven't really looked at is that because of the way the government have treated European Social Fund money, apprenticeships, work programme, and all core mainstream funding is also been linked or matched to ESF money. And as a consequence of that, when the ESF money dries up, because it's match funding usually at about 50-50, sometimes 60-40, what you will find is that chunk of budget will not come. So we need to be understanding what is the government's response going to be. Is it going to be to cut the training, or is it going to be to fund it, but fund it from UK sources? And it's those things that I guess will start to emerge over this next sort of 6-12 months. So, and again, that while it's not necessarily a change for what's going to happen between now and Christmas, it will potentially be the stuff we need to know what's happening, because that might be by the time we get to December, we start to look at what we're going to do next year and how we're going to position your businesses so that you can actually adapt to that next year. But 3 million apprenticeships is the governance objective. You know, that is a lot of opportunity for providers. It's accessible for employers. It is a good, you know, there is a lot to be done. 600,000 a year. It's a large sector of the, you know, publicly funded training. And then, like you say, localisation, there's a lot of local authorities that are levy employers now, and they are looking at both what they do for themselves, but under the rules of levy, what they do for other organisations that are connected as part of their supply chains and things like that. So there's a lot going on. Localisation is an issue, is an opportunity. As I say, you've got the core mainstream programs which are there.
Stuart, I'm going to wrap up there, but thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate that, and thank you for your support.
Pleasure.
It's been sort of 9 months, and we've had a fantastic journey, and look forward to working with you definitely for the foreseeable future.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.